Let's assume that you are not the Messiah. Is that a pretty safe assumption? Let's assume that you're not the president-elect of the United States. Let's just assume that. Although it'd be nice to have them here. Let's assume you're not the 14th reincarnation of the Dalai Lama. You're not a superhero. You're not the founder of Facebook. You're not a fashion model. And what hurts most of all, you're not the sexiest man or woman alive. Sorry, Rick. That's right. John the Baptist, in this morning's passage, is prompted with a question about his identity. And he responds with saying who he is not. Isn't that interesting? And who he is not is probably the most authentic thing that he can say in relationship to the one for whom he waits. He could have said, I'm the son of Elizabeth and Zachariah. We remember that story. He could have said, I'm just, some dude who's down on his luck and I eat locusts and wild honey and I just like to hang out here and talk to people. He could have affirmed any particular identity, but he chose to say, first of all, what he is not, who he is not. When I first received my most recent cell phone number, by the way, which is 509-999-4434, give me a call. When I first received that number, I kept getting automated phone calls with a computerized voice, and the voice would say, as soon as I picked up, we're trying to reach Michael Lippert. If this is Michael Lippert, press 1 now. If this is not Michael Lippert, press 2 now. And then when I would press 2, the voice had the audacity to ask me, I'm not kidding, to go and find Michael Lippert and bring him to the phone. I received about 10 phone calls asking for Michael Lippert. And if this is not Michael Lippert, would you please get Michael Lippert on the phone? And I later just imagined, what if I was at Starbucks or at some bar sometime and somebody said, hey, my name is Michael Lippert. Well, yeah, what would I do? How would I respond? Would I manhandle him to the phone and say, somebody needs to talk to you? But life's not like that. All I can say for sure is that I am not Michael Lippert. But who am I? Who are you? When the man straddling the Jordan River is pressed on the question by the priests and the Levites, and then when they press him some more and they say, what do you say about yourself? In verse 22, his reply is, I am the voice of one crying out in the wilderness. I am out of cell phone range. Can you hear me now? And that seems to be significant. It seems to be an important moment on the border, on the boundary marker, just where hundreds of years earlier the former Hebrew slaves had crossed the Jordan, right? From being slaves in Egypt, they'd crossed the Sinai Peninsula and into the Promised Land, but they had to cross the Jordan River. John the Baptist is standing right there on that boundary. And he's saying, I am the voice of one crying out in the wilderness. And the question is, if we're going to meet him there, even today, metaphorically, right? I don't want you to fly out to the Jordan right now. Probably wouldn't be safe. But what are the borders in our lives? What are the boundaries in our lives? What are the places that if we cross over, we're going to be a little bit outside of our comfort zone. We're not going to have the amenities and the things that keep us comfortable. What are those places? Last week, in the wake of Carrie Fisher's death, was it last week? Her mother, I find this just so mysterious. Her mother, Debbie Reynolds, also died. Just about a day afterwards. And the news just exploded with all kinds of curiosity stories. Did Debbie Reynolds die of a broken heart? Is that really a thing? Can you die of a broken heart? Is that a medical thing? Had Carrie Fisher, here's another news story, best known for her role in the Star Wars saga, felt trapped by the stereotype of being, remember who she was? Princess Leia. And it made me wonder, what would it have been like for Carrie Fisher to grow up from a young age with a famous mother, right? She was famous, Debbie Reynolds. Who are you? Well, I'm not my mother, right? I'm not my father. My father divorced my mother and married Liz Taylor, right? Imagine the scandal. That's not who I am. And I started to wonder about the real story about the identity of Carrie Fisher and Debbie Reynolds. And not to be too melodramatic, but if you're really interested, there's a book by Carrie Fisher called Postcards from the Edge, in which she describes her struggles with identity, with kind of identifying who she is. About herself and her own struggles with fame, she wrote, "I rarely cry. I save my feelings up inside like I have something more specific in mind for them. I am waiting for the exact perfect situation, and then boom, I'll explode in a light show of feeling and emotion, a piñata stuffed with tender nuances and pent-up passions." About her mother, Debbie Reynolds, she wrote, "She wanted to be so tranquil, to be someone who took walks in the late afternoon sun, listening to the birds and crickets and feeling the whole world breathe. Instead, she lived in her head like a mad woman locked in a tower, hearing the wind howling through her hair and waiting for someone to come and rescue her from feeling things so deeply that her bones burned. She had plenty of evidence that she had a good life. She just couldn't feel the life that she had." Postcards from the edge, from the boundary. And here's the point I'm trying to emphasize both last week and this week. I am not the news about me. None of us are. The news about us is not us. The information, the data, the statistics about us, that's not us. News is more and more information. And the sooner we detach, I think, based upon the Scripture, the sooner we detach ourselves from the crazed frenzy of news about us, the better off we'll be. I'm not saying to ditch your cell phone or to stop reading the newspaper or to stop watching CNN or MSNBC. My wife is constantly saying, "That's bad for you. Stop watching MSNBC." I'm like, but I want to keep up with what's going on, right? I want to see all the crap that Trump is pulling, right? I want to be sad that, Bernie Sanders wasn't the Democratic nominee. I want all these things. I'm a Democrat. I'm this. I'm that. I'm a Capricorn. But what if I detached? What if I went to the border or the boundary or the edge. Then what's more important is not the fog of words about me or about anyone. Then what's more important is who I am not. I'm not the Messiah. I'm not going to do the saving. I'm going to believe in the saving. During his adolescence, John Updike, famous writer, he wrote this about his teenage years. I reluctantly perceived of the Christian religion that I had been born into that almost no one believed it. Believed it really. Not its ministers, not its pillars like my father and his father before him. Those signs of belief, news of belief, churches, public prayers, mottos on coins, those things existed everywhere. When you moved toward Christianity, it dissipated as a fog. Solidly opaque in the distance, thins to transparency when you walk into it. Think about that image. Christianity like a fog, like this blank wall. It seems so solid, and you walk toward it, and it dissipates. He's a teenager, and he's worrying. He's anxious. Does anyone really believe this? And he writes, I decided nevertheless I would believe. To believe, however, isn't as many of you might assume. To believe isn't first and foremost to affirm, I'm a Christian, and you're not. Or I'm good, and you're bad. That's not it. The first thing to believe is to say, I am not the Messiah. The first thing to believe is when we negate the ways that people have to pigeonhole us. I tell my students, I say, I'm your professor. You can call me Scott. And then I wink at them and I say, but that's not all. I'm a spouse, but that's not all. I'm a son, but that's not all. You see? I'm a father. How I love the role of being a father, but that's not all. I'm simply one voice in the wilderness, and I'm saying there's something out there, the person, the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, and it brings meaning to all those roles and responsibilities. It gives depth to everything that I claim I live for. If not, it's just a charade. If not, it's just us playing parts in a play. You know, the Shakespeare line, all the world's a stage, and everyone's just acting. When I was younger, just married to Cheryl, I thought I had to be a man. You know what I mean by that? Rick, Dan, forget your name, Bill, Tom, Jim. Be a man. I didn't know how to drive a stick shift. She did, right? My dad was an automobile mechanic. He would have taught me, but he didn't, you know. Oh, you'll pick it up. So Cheryl has a stick shift car, and she wants me to drive her car. I'm like, I don't know how. You don't know how. I felt so small and insignificant. What am I going to How am I going to get up in the morning? I'm not the man. So we went to this empty parking lot on the edge of town where no one could see. And I get in the driver's seat, and she sits in the passenger seat, and my wife is teaching me how to drive a car. So humiliating. And I would depress the clutch and give it some gas and, do all the things that she was instructing me to do. And I would go first gear and then second gear, and then it would stall. It did that several times over. And finally she said, put it in reverse. I could do reverse. And I thought to myself, what if I could just go in reverse forever? At least I'd be moving. But I tell you what happened in those moments. When I decided I didn't have to be the man, I became empowered to be a man who's vulnerable, who's not always in charge. You see? I'm not the Messiah. It's okay to not be the one to fix it. It's okay to say, I'm on a journey just like you. There's this great philosopher who's not a Christian. His name is Jean-Paul Sartre. And he says, I am the self I will be in the mode of not being it. Well, we can't talk about that right now, but it's just an amazing statement. I'm the self I will be in the mode of not being it. But here's what he means practically. He went to a restaurant, and the waiter was too solicitous. He was too much into being a waiter, right? He had sold out. He had given his whole life over to being a waiter. And Sartre said he felt sorry for that man, because that's all he was. He was playing the part of a waiter. I think about that in relationship to Origin Church and to what we're doing here, because it's one thing that I'm acutely aware of is church is kind of a cool thing for people who need it, but does everybody need it? Yeah, I think they do, and here's why. Because otherwise we're just playing parts. We're just living out these vacuous roles. I'm a father, I'm a mother, I'm a spouse, I'm a student, I'm a worker, I'm a boss. In one of the books on the shelf out there in the hallway, a book by Tex Sample, there's a story about how Tex Sample sadly lost his son named Steve. And he wrote, and this is how he starts off, how Steve won the most beautiful baby award at Boston University School of Theology. The most beautiful baby. Think about that, growing up. You're beautiful. But sadly, then came a barrage of moments when Stephen couldn't sit still in class. He developed addictions as a teenager, addictions to alcohol and drugs. He always had women, right? Girls always loved him. They wanted to help him. But he broke all of their hearts. And finally, after a long process, Tex Sample's son got sober. He joined Alcoholics Anonymous. And he joined an Alcoholics Anonymous motorcycle gang. The gang was known as Visions. And just listen to this description. I remember the sense of a strange people of God, drawn from all walks of life, very alien to respectable churches I knew. Yeah. There was this very material, mystical feel of people on the move, finding their way, always just making it one more day. Now, I don't know what you think we're doing here at Origin, and I'm not recommending that we become a biker church or anything like that. But I am attracted to the idea of a church on the move. A church where we put ourselves in the path of people that we wouldn't ordinarily meet. Right? Kind of on the border between church and non-church. Does that make any sense? I'm talking about people who say F-bombs and aren't always together. I'm talking about those folks. What if we just developed a conversation with them? What if we talked about Jesus? And the first thing I would say, is I am not the Messiah. But there's one among us who comes after me. I'm not worthy to untie the thong of his sandals. Let's pray.